Tim Goldstein, autistic adult, and your host for Life in a Neurotypical Universe, where we take a look at life from the perspective of an autistic adult. This is the second session with Emma Pinnock. Emma and I had such a great conversation in the first session that we decided to just keep the recorder going and keep on talking. And what we have in this session is what you got as we kept on going. If you missed the first session, go back, listen to it. Emma's full of just amazing wisdom that applies all the way from children through adults. Hope you enjoy this episode with myself and Emma. And if you missed the first one, you want to make sure you're going to get that. Enjoy. In my day job and, being autistic and in my day job in the tech, industry, when I enter into a new project, and I work as a consultant, so entering into a new project is something I do like on a daily basis. Yeah. And, as I go into a new project, I have to try and pick up the way things work in that group, in that organization, and those kinds of things. And, being autistic, that can certainly be a challenge for me. Yes. And what ends up happening, though, for me at least, is fortunately, because I'm good enough at speaking, that I can create some of those more human connections that a lot of people with autism, are challenged with. And that wasn't something I was born with, just for everybody that wants to know. I actually went and was trained and taught in this methodology I refer to as emotional speaking, to be able to connect with neurotypicals on the way they're expecting to be connected. They're expecting to have some emotion in your conversation. They're not expecting that total flat affect. So anyway, when I go into, new clients and everything, it's always interesting because you get to see, I guess you would say, all these corporate things, but magnified because it's like getting hired and working there while you're working with them, but you're not getting hired and having to go through a new job change. So, I've probably worked with 25, 30 clients already this year. Yeah. So you get much more experience than, most people don't have 30 jobs in a year.
Definitely. I find that.
And it's so interesting as you go from organization to organization about these companies that are willing to listen to new approaches to doing things. And the company I work for is a very cutting edge company. Actually, Google's in the process of acquiring us to give, so we're a fairly leading company. Yeah. And we do things very differently, which is what makes the product work the way it does. That is contrary to the traditional approaches that are used in the same scenarios. And it's very interesting seeing some organizations will embrace that new approach and go, wow, this is cool. It's so different. Show me how. And other ones, I spend most of the engagement trying to convince them not to write it the way they already know, because that's not how this product is designed to be used. Yeah. But you're really seeing that exact same thing that you're kind of saying is, one, it gives you the space to say, this is how this product is designed and should be used, versus the product you are using. Yes, the way you wrote it, you're very skilled. You do a great job in it, but this product has a different approach and design to doing it. And if you use your approach over here, it's not going to pan out really well.
Only take you so.
Some will listen. Some just plow ahead, totally ignore you. And 6 months later, they have a big bill to fix everything. But you see that in companies all the time. And you also see it, I'm sure you've dealt with some of the candidates that we'll say companies decided shouldn't continue to be, candidates there. Yeah. And very often that's what it really comes down to, was they presented an idea, a perception, a concept that if you really sat down and looked at it, probably has some merit to it. Now, it may or may not be the one you choose because they may have not balanced enough of the inputs. Maybe they didn't look at the business side. Maybe they didn't look at the economy. Maybe, who knows? But nonetheless, it was an idea that was worthy of considering amongst the people who know those different areas of saying, how's it fit in this area? How's it fit in this area?
Yeah, definitely.
As opposed to the other ones that go, yeah, but this is how we've been doing it for years and it works great.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but guess what? You're walking off the end of a dock. I mean, that one you're on, it only goes so long before we all know it runs into a problem, and the problem is it stops. That's the problem, and you're walking on water next.
Yeah, very true. And I think what I've really liked hearing as I've entered the business side of what I do now is this whole idea of market disruptors, and positive disruptors, and companies and business starting to use that language, that actually we need to be a market disruptor. And as I said, going back earlier, I was saying about just having people with creativity and innovation is going to help people to be market disruptors. But that's a very new language that's starting to develop, and I think that that's where different thought processes and different ways of getting people's thoughts process onto the table without dismissing. When I was in my last job and I had my team, I used to have a non-judgmental meeting where they could just say whatever it is they wanted to say, even if it was about me. Ugh. So I would allow them basically whatever time they wanted to do. So basically, I knew from those meetings where my staff were. And people, when I explain that to people, they're like, that is so brave. But no, it wasn't, because if in the day to day, and because I am very goal driven, I can miss what's going on with my team. And if they haven't yet built up the type of relationship that allows them to just come up to me and say, Emma, I'm feeling this, I've got to give them a space to do so with no repercussion. That should be, again, that leadership push of, I haven't got all the answers. No matter how much you pay me, I still do not have all the answers. And so I really need to make sure that my team is the driving force behind me. And if that's the only way that's going to happen, is if I allow my team to have the type of voice that they need to have. And it's usually a voice without judgment. And it's giving people that space, again, that word space, to just give you what it is they have. Then it was my job to go away with that, as heavy as it was, as light as it was, to go and make process out of that, process and system that made sense for the organization, but the end goal, which was always what was my driver, which was the children at the end. It's basically knowing that you can always be open to other people's suggestions and ideas without it threatening a position of anything, really, you know?
I've had the experience of explaining to a manager that I reported to, and they were asking about a critique that was done by another employee on some work I had done, which no big deal. And she just wanted to know, give me your feedback from the critique. So I gave her my feedback, and that turned into a lecture about how I should be accepting feedback, which is somewhat negative. That I actually gave the feedback to the manager. We know, first off, that 90% of the people wouldn't actually say what they were thinking.
Very true.
Now, if you have a microphone at their desk and listen for it 10 minutes after the meeting, you'll know exactly what they were thinking, but not in the meeting.
Very true.
I went and gave her, my thought on the feedback.
Yeah.
And instead, I got a lecture about, well, you're not willing to take feedback.
Yeah.
Well, the answer happened to be, it was an area that I'm a acclaimed expert in, and I can show, I can prove it.
Yeah.
Feedback being given by a person that has no training or expertise in the area.
Yeah.
So was I accepting to his feedback? I mean, I listened to it because I was trying to find, just because he doesn't have training doesn't mean he's not a smart person and can't, identify challenges that I should be working on.
Mm.
And he did come up with one thing that, bad habit of mine, but I tend to be a little loose with the particular words I use, which in a technical situation can be bad. And I used, the wrong term in one or two places,
Okay.
which he pointed out. Very good call out. I mean, didn't upset me. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, to know that I mistakenly used the wrong terms.
Yeah.
But anything else on his feedback of the way I present, those kind of things, he had no basis to, it's like taking a PhD, in something.
Yeah.
And having a sixth grader evaluate him.
Okay.
Well, there's a couple things they could pick out on. I liked listening to them. They were interesting enough. I understood what they said, but they really can't evaluate the person's knowledge, ability, skills. They only have a limited amount to measure against.
Definitely.
So that was an example of not doing exactly what you're saying, which is what this person should have done in my esteemed opinion,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that they should have listened to the input I gave them and made absolutely no comment whatsoever about it.
yeah. It's really interesting because that whole not being able to take feedback is a really big thing in school management, in lots of areas of management, I'm very sure. And that's just really got me thinking, because I was always the one that ended up having the non-feedback person. So it was like, so let you go and tell him. You tell him. And it's really interesting, isn't it? I think I'm just trying to think of process there, and what was it that made people think that you, Emma, could be the person to do that? And I think it is in that moment finding a space to say we respectfully disagree, even though your report would have been absolutely, at the top level for you. That person probably didn't capture your vision, but they had to be able to say, I'm going to respectfully disagree. And I think that's where that space for both of us and both sets of minds kind of come in, so that actually people can say, okay, that wasn't really taken on in the way that I expected it to be. I'm not sure what the change will be next time, but I was,
Right.
it's kind of, that's the moment I think where that real making space for each other has to happen in that very moment, because I can see both sides of that because I've been on both sides of that. And so I can see that. So like right now in my consultancy role with a particular school, and I'm like, my goodness, you guys really don't know this. And and they're trying to like break down everything I'm doing. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but you still don't know this. So I'm completely, so I get that from both sides. And I think it's that moment when you get into the middle of that minute, how do we make space for each other? How do we respectfully say, I don't get where you are right now, I don't get where what you're thinking and where you're going with this, but I'm going to respectfully hold it in my mind, but that's the feedback for now. And
I would have been very accepting of that type of conversation where it was, I'm not quite understanding where you're coming from. It sounds to me as if what you're saying is you're not real open to the feedback.
yeah,
And would have been a conversation then about it of, no, this, I really am open to it, but you've got to admit, this is pretty darn funny. I've been trained by the best in the world, and somebody who's never gone for any training is trying to critique me.
yeah,
You just got to laugh. I mean,
so true. I've
at least to me, that was funny. I mean,
yeah, I've been there, definitely been there.
then she went off on, her tear that I don't want to listen to feedback. But it wasn't that I wasn't willing to listen to feedback. It was that I'll listen to feedback to people who have pertinent feedback to give.
Mhm.
Like his thing about not getting these words, you used words incorrectly.
Yeah,
Valuable feedback.
yeah,
Telling me how to present when he has no training in it and is hard and difficult to understand himself because he doesn't use periods or silence or any sounds in his voice besides the single note that he talks on all the time that really gets so boring that 5 minutes of the presentation, I'm falling asleep anyways.
okay.
So you can see why when she asked me about the feedback, the first thing I did was laugh,
Yeah,
just because I'm thinking about it. This is like really, really funny. And she took that as being
yeah,
essentially dismissive of her.
yeah,
And it was not dismissive of her, nor was it lack of respect. It was really just, in my mind, in my autistic perception of the thing,
yeah.
if you just stand back, it's pretty funny if you've got a sixth grader trying to critique somebody who's a professional.
No, completely.
That's just funny. I mean, just no matter how you do it, it's going to be funny.
I get it. Definitely get it.
She didn't think it was funny.
As I said, I get both sides because I'm sitting there thinking, scratching my head, thinking, have I done that before? I think I probably have.
But again, I think the whole trick is,
Mm,
and to me, this is one of the big keys, I think, in dealing with autistic people that nobody explains to them.
mm,
And I guess it's because it's got to come from an autistic person or you won't make sense of it.
yeah,
And although it does apply to all humans, I think it applies more to neurodiverse
yeah,
humans. And that is, you cannot deny the person's reality.
no,
Now, my reality may not fit your reality whatsoever. I can tell Emma all about my crazy life, and she can shake her head and go, "Man, you are just wacky. You should write a friggin' fiction book, you know?" Because that's the only way you could do that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't really get it 100%, but the trick is you've got to be willing to ask about the differences and ask about, okay, I'm not getting this.
Yeah,
Help me understand why you see it this way,
yeah,
instead of making the intuiting the intent of, oh, I'm just dismissing the whole process.
yeah.
No, I'm just laughing because us Asperger types tend to be sarcastic as heck, and we find humor in the weirdest, crazy things you've ever seen.
I'm aware. I'm definitely aware.
And she certainly didn't take it as being humor. She took it like she was talking to another neurotypical who would have only said it if it was something very serious, because otherwise they would have hid everything, because that's what neurotypicals do. They don't come out with what they have on their mind normally.
So
They check if the chief is going to approve it before they say it.
so true. And I think it's really interesting because that was one of my loves, is one of my loves of working with children who are neurodiverse, because they really explain what they're thinking and what they're feeling, which is just so refreshing, because we are, or the rest of us are, full of layers of all sorts to get through. And it was really funny. So when I ran the unit that I did, I had majority were all boys. And then a young lady came into the space as well. And her way of explaining emotions really showed the female difference in how we share emotion. So even though that, the boys on that were neurodiverse were very clear in showing their emotions, sometimes it was more explosive or more direct or one of those, those kind of things. And she was very much about sharing emotions, but she was very analytical, very thoughtful. And I'm not saying that that's every woman on the spectrum or every woman full stop, but it was very,
But I would say, just to interrupt you for a second on that, is far more typical of female presentation of autism
yes,
than what everybody thinks of, which is essentially male representation of autism.
most definitely.
And I would say, in my experience, it falls like the difference between men and women's heart attacks. For years and years, we sent women home from the emergency rooms and they dropped dead from heart attacks because the symptoms were different than a man's.
So true.
And what they've now found is roughly 20% of men have women type heart attacks, and they tend to go home and drop dead because nobody finds them out. And about 20% of women have men type heart attacks, and those are the ones that get treated appropriately
Wow.
because that's what they knew what to look for.
How interesting, how interesting. But yeah, it was such a stark thing to see, but then it was such a refreshing thing for me to see, in the sense of understanding human nature as a whole, of the differences of how women do process emotion and language and all of those kind of things very differently to boys and men and boys at times. And so that's actually one of my loves about working with people that are, neurodiverse, is that actually it is so clear that you don't go home and think it again. It just is what it is. you know?
Right. There's not much thinking into it you need to do. We tend to be pretty, and again, male or female doesn't matter. You're right.
Yeah.
What I've seen is autistic females tend to have much better awareness of emotion and emotional state, and kind of the emotional tone of a room or a person they're dealing with, than a male will,
Yeah.
in autistic male. But what they all tell me is, even though they can sense the shift, sense the change, sense something went on, they don't know what to do about it.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that is just an important thing that we really need to bring out more, because I personally think there's a lot more autistic women than we are recognizing,
Definitely.
because the expression of it is,
Different.
I mean, put it this way, they basically mask as being neurotypical so darn well till they finally have a breakdown at about 35 or 40.
Definitely, definitely. And what I've seen in education is that it comes around 15, 16, when the pressures of being a girl into a woman, into exams, etc., seem to really hit in. And that idea of, boys and all of that, that isn't going to might not be their first desire to be in that type of relationship straight away. That's when you kind of see that difference starting to highlight itself. And it's really funny, because I was in a school this week with a parent of a girl who is most likely on the spectrum, but the school can't see it because she masks so well.
Because she masks so well
That's so well.
that
Yeah.
unless you know specifically what you're looking for,
Yes.
or you can manage to get the right circumstances that, the reality is, I'm convinced that there isn't such a thing as autism traits and symptoms. There's not OCD and ADHD traits and symptoms. They're all human traits.
Human traits, completely.
And some of us have them at high levels, some of them have them at low levels, but we can find,
Yeah.
any of these people we'd agree are neurotypical that show black and white thinking, that show, lack of executive control, and they just blurt out whatever. So we know it's not a trait of a specific disease. It's a human trait.
Most definitely. It's just the
I just think that what we're not recognizing is that the human traits that women tend to display are different than the human traits that men tend to display.
most
And when you throw autism on it,
Yeah.
to me, all you're really doing is kind of like throwing gasoline on the fire. It doesn't change the fact that we have differences.
definitely.
It just magnifies those differences because we can't understand them real well.
That is so true. It's so true. And to go back to the points we were making in the early part of the conversation about just general difference, that then applies to race as well, because there's a real under diagnosis here around Black boys on the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, what I've read is that blacks, at least in the U.S.,
Yeah.
a white male child will usually be diagnosed somewhere around 3 years old, is the ballpark figure. I mean, these aren't the exact studies, but roughly.
Yeah.
But when you go to a black male child, it now becomes more around 5 to 6 years old before they diagnose. Now, they're not expressing anything different at 3. They're expressing exactly the same stuff.
Exactly.
But as you say, there's a different expectation between what people expect of the black child versus the white child, when there should be no difference in expectation between the two.
Exactly.
I mean, there is some thought that there's some family and cultural pieces involved,
Definitely.
which
Agree.
you do need to be aware of. And the thought is essentially in the black community, you're more concerned with, and you can deny or whatever. I mean, obviously I'm not black. I don't know. That in general, the focus is much more around community and interaction in community and fitting in like that than it is necessarily all about school performance.
I think that there is a balance between that, and I think school performance is really key, but I think there is an element of that social fitting in, and I think from a cultural point of view, especially from the UK cultural point of view, it is very much been about not wanting to be labelled, and I think that somehow community and organisations have kind of fed into this concept that there will be behavioural needs with black boys. They've fed into this concept, and I don't understand how that's happened.
I'm going to let out a secret to the entire world.
Yeah.
There's behavioral issues with any boys. I don't care what color, what race. Us boys are challenging when we're young.
Tell me about it. I got one of my own. So, and I think that's it. And I think that's one of the things that's been a barrier here in the UK is perception of what how a young black boy will present himself at school or in organisations. And so I think that's been another layer. I think there's not a understanding of autism in black communities in the UK as well. And so that's another layer to go through. And the difference between, I think, as well, in the UK in terms of a white family who may see that their child is kind of acting in a way that they don't expect, is that they act on it much quicker, because there isn't the fear of the judgment, the questions, and all of those extra things that may come in, because sometimes the system has shown black people that that's the case. And then, but with people from a black family, unless they kind of had experiences or have different types of education, they've kind of gone in a different route, they will most likely hang back and not want that label. And then it's like, again, that intersectionality, understanding that not every black group is the same, and not every person in every black group is the same, and all of this that's where I think that a lot of that disparity is coming in. So it's about how people are perceiving black boys first of all, and I think it's more boys. Girls we have to kind of put to side slightly, because girls on the spectrum are not being spotted anyway. So
right, it doesn't matter whether you pick what color, race, whatever. If it's female, we know that we're under diagnosing
Everything.
And, I actually think this is kind of, going off on a different tangent, but, what the heck? I actually think a lot of it has to come down to the actual diagnosis criteria and how it was developed.
Me too.
It was developed around children.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, Connor thought that autism was only nonverbal children.
Yes.
Asperger's thought it was all just a bunch of brilliant children.
Yep.
And nobody ever said anything about it being adults.
No. Yeah.
So we just have never created the criteria around adults. We created it around children, which means you basically have to observe them.
Yes.
Because, you can't reason with a 3-year-old.
No.
I know people think you can. I know they've tried. Trust me, it doesn't work. You can't reason with me at 60 either, but but you can't reason with a 3-year-old.
No.
So how else can you understand the condition besides just standing back and interpreting it as best you can?
Very true.
What's never happened, though, to me is if I take the autistic adults that I know, which is a fairly large range of them, and we go and sit down with the DSM-5 and look through the diagnostic criteria.
Yeah.
Unless you apply it in the factor of saying, did you ever?
Yeah.
Unless you apply it that way, which really means we're just going to go back and pretend like you're a kid and diagnose you as a kid.
Yeah.
Instead of asking you things, trying to find out. And I think it comes down to it's your thinking that is the big difference in being neurodiverse. Instead of asking you about how do you think about these situations, how do you deal with this? And I can explain to you what it is. And we could come up with a bunch of rules that could easily diagnose adults far better than these children-based criteria.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's a big problem is if you don't catch them in that kid range. And like you say, the girls, when they tend to go into the, life gets a little busier and it starts getting the social and the boy aspect and picking college and careers. And they tend to surface some there.
Yes.
But other than that, they really don't surface till you get them into, careers and things like that and start pouring pressure on for a couple of years.
Yes. So true. So true. So there's that criteria and what people are looking for. And I think to add to that as well, the research predominantly was just done on boys and white boys.
Right. Not only was it boys, bad enough. I mean, it was white boys to make it even worse because we know that, we've already talked about a bunch of those differences. And it's not that a white boy's better or a white boy's any worse. It's just that culturally it's going to introduce some factors that you need to be aware of to notice what is going on beyond the cultural differences.
Most definitely. So it's really interesting, isn't it? I think, as you rightly said at the beginning, such a long way has been taken in this journey of understanding neurodiversity over the last 20 years. So much information. But then you can see when we have these types of conversations, how much more there is to do and how much more space there is to kind of make for each other and really just understand each other on the human level and try and put these labels somewhere else if we can. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's kind of the balance between the academic approach, which is essentially saying, whatever I know now, there's more to know.
Yeah.
And the business approach of give me an answer that's good enough to get the job done for today so we can move on.
Very true. Very, very, very true. And
one is really looking for just give me what to do.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one is really looking at, well, we don't know how, I mean, we know women aren't showing up right. So there's obviously, we need to do more work there. We know that, people of color and people of different races aren't being diagnosed at rates that, we have any reason to expect them to be at.
Yes.
There's nothing we've found so far that says there should be any difference between males and females or between any race or color or anything
Not at all.
in autism.
Not at all.
But the diagnosis rates are definitely very different.
Very different. Very, very different. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about, here in the U.S., there's quite a bit going on with what they refer to as the Autism at Work movement, which was started by, of all things, it was started by SAP of Germany.
Okay.
So why is it going on in the U.S.? I don't know, but that's where it's going on. They're doing it in Germany also, but involved with them also, Microsoft has gotten involved with it. JP Morgan Chase is involved with it. EY is involved with it. Ford Motor Company. The list goes on and on. There's probably at least 50 Fortune 500 companies that are doing formal autism at work programs.
Okay. Yep.
Now, there's pluses, there's minuses. Some are better, some are worse. Some are working better than others, but at least they're proactively doing something.
Definitely.
Is there a similar kind of movement, or has any of this bled over into the UK? As far as I know, out of the groups that I've dealt with, there's one gentleman who actually works for, I want to say it's EY.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure he's in Ireland, and he's a managing director, so quite high up, autistic, and they hired him through the program.
Brilliant.
As far as I know, he's the only person I know of in the UK that has anything to do with, and that's not even the UK really. Yeah. That's just close to the UK.
Well, yeah.
But, you know, that has anything to do with autism at work. I'm curious. I mean, is it a movement?
It's not a movement yet. It's a conversation. It's definitely a conversation. And I think that's what's starting to make sense, that people are having the conversation. So there is, we've got her name right now, but there is one lady that's got an organization where she does do a lot of promotion and advocacy for the space. And hopefully I'll remember it later. But she's done that, and it's starting to kind of just build the conversations up. So I did a talk at the NEC a couple of weeks back, and it was mostly about business, not actually my business. But obviously I shared what my business was. And as a result, the conversations were starting. You can hear people going, yeah, we just don't get that right. We just don't get that right. And so I think people are now starting to understand that actually they've got to get this, do this better, but it's definitely not there yet. And as I said, I was talking to somebody that runs a diversity and inclusion company, and he was saying even for his company, which is doing great things, they haven't got a neurodiverse arm yet. And so actually it's about that conversation developing. But I do think people are getting more and more interested in knowing what they can do and how they can do it. So yeah.
Well, my question is how can you and I do something to help bring some of this, you know, wonderful knowledge that's come out of the U.S. Autism at Work efforts over to the UK?
How can we?
I mean, you know, all these different companies are making this stuff open. It's available. They'll be glad to give you the documentation on how their programs work.
Definitely.
I mean, so there is a huge body of knowledge and of true business cases.
Yeah.
Which, of course, talking to business people, that's what you need is business cases of, you know, I don't just need to do this because it's socially the thing to do. I need to do this because it's beneficial to my company, my shareholders, my employees, my, you know, fill in the blank.
It's got to have an impact for everybody, doesn't it?
You know, and I was talking with Jose Valesco, who's the head of SAP's Autism at Work program. On Monday, he and I had a good chat. And he, you know, was kind of talking about a concept of really breaking it down from being done at a company level and moving it more to like an education system, where you go and, you know, you go to a school or whatever you want to call it, and maybe it's a month, maybe it's 2 months long, and basically you get certified in how to work in a corporation.
Yeah.
So the problem with the current Autism at Work programs is if you go to Microsoft, you go through their whole program and you get done and you decide, well, Microsoft just isn't
for me,
my, you know, cup of tea. Yeah. I mean, they're nice to me. I'm being treated well, but just not me. And then you want to go to SAP. So then you go through SAP's 6-week thing to, you know, finally get the job to find out, you know, and then you say, okay, that one didn't work. So let's go to DXC and you give them a try. Well, and then you go through their 4 or 5 or 6-week program before you start to figure it out.
Yeah.
And what he was saying was, you know, we don't do that with engineering. We don't say that, hey, you know, SAP will only take, if you graduate from Harvard with CS, then we'll look at you. But if you don't come from Harvard, we don't want you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they don't.
So his concept is essentially, and in the U.S., it would have to be done on a state-by-state basis because a lot of the laws around the funding of vocational pieces are handled on a state basis over here. And they do vary considerably by state.
Yeah.
But overall, his concept is more building that university system, think of it, so that you don't have to go to 20 companies and go through their process to find out whether you then are going to fit in the company. You've already been certified as being trained in how to be a corporate employee.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, things as simple as, you know, how do you handle lunch? Well, you know, it used to be easy once upon a time because when it was lunch hour, a bell blew or something and everybody took lunch. I mean, the whole office cleaned out. And
go back.
Right. I mean, it was pretty easy. Just follow them and you know what to do for lunch. And Nowadays, though, I mean, there is no such thing as a lunch hour. I might be eating lunch sitting at my computer while I'm working on something at 3 in the afternoon, or while I'm having a conference at 11 in the morning, or who knows.
Yeah.
But we don't teach people how to make those decisions. So they're coming out of a school where it was very structured of this is lunchtime, or here you have class at this period, you have class at this period, so you have this block always open in the middle. That's a good time to take lunch.
Yeah.
Well, you know the work world. I mean, you could get a call as soon as we hang up that says, "Hey, I want to meet with you," and it's right in the middle of your lunchtime.
Exactly. And that is the reality that employers don't yet take on, as you rightly said. So the person themselves needs to have a bit of understanding of that, and that's going to have possibly and will happen when you're in the workplace. But actually, employers also have to have the understanding that that's going to be a difficult thing for somebody to work out, for some people to work out. So actually, that again, making space for each other, making that room happen. How do employers make sure that that's quite clear and succinct and open around, we have a very relaxed environment here. You take a break when you've got 10 minutes, blah, blah, blah. Or actually, it's really structured and your break time's at 12 till 12:30, And so it's thinking about that, really, how those two parts of that puzzle meet together. But it's all, yeah, but then it's going back to your original thought around how that happens in the UK. I think that's a big journey, but there are people I could connect you with. But I think that's a big journey at the moment, but it's definitely something that needs to be brought together. And I'm thinking, and I love your idea, about a bit like a training course of 6 weeks for somebody who's on the spectrum to kind of just talk about the idea of work and the workspace and the work environment. Because as we know, rightly so, that the idea from training will be one thing, then the reality will be something else.
Right.
That to me is quite uniquely thought about. And I know there's a few companies that do the first layer around, interview skills and preparing them for work in that respect. But I would be interested to know if those companies have gone as deep in as that, because you've made me think a little bit deeper just from that one example, because I wouldn't have thought as deep as that, i.e. neurotypical here. So, so yeah, I wouldn't have gone in as hard as that. So that's really interesting. And I think that's where as well the conversations need to be really open and the ideas need to be put out and space made for, so that it can happen, because I wouldn't have thought like that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're actively planning on, working on this and kind of come up with how do we propose the kind of process and governance,
Yeah.
because you need to duplicate it in 50 states so that it can work with, each state appropriately. So you really have to set up that governance model to run a program.
Definitely. Yeah.
And right now, nobody's really taken their autism at work program and reduced it down to a governance model. They have it more as a implementation model.
Yes.
So the pieces are there to work from.
I like it.
And there's certainly effort going on amongst a number of us to say, we need to get it out of the companies and roll it out into the bigger world.
Yes.
And I would say, Jose Valesco, thank you, Jose, for sharing it. You have a phenomenal idea. You're a brilliant guy.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that's the kind of thing of how do we start porting those kind of things over to you, as opposed to, I mean, why should the UK have to reinvent the wheel if you can start benefiting on some of these things that have already been done?
Most definitely, and as I said, there are spaces and there's people I will connect you with that can start to have some impact in, because I think it's about opening those doors, isn't it? And opening people's minds to the fact that this isn't a massive leap anymore, because actually some work's been done over there.
Well, even more so when you start pointing out the companies, just the picture of the logos of the companies at these conferences.
Yes.
It's a who's who of the major corporations of the world.
Of course.
So if nothing else, if the companies there don't look at it and go, geez, if, SAP, Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase, I mean, you go down the list, these are all the major leading companies in their fields.
Definitely.
If they're doing it, maybe I should listen to what they're doing. Maybe I won't do it, but maybe I should at least listen.
Listen, most definitely. But yeah, definitely when that starts to develop and you're looking to put that out in a wider picture, we can talk about how we connect certain people from my point of view, because I do think that people are interested and there are people that want the conversation and are starting to do little bits and bobs of training. But it's that organized approach, it's that real getting underneath the whole system of it all and pulling it together that's going to make the difference. But yeah, I do think it's that. It's how do you get that message into organizations, and so that people are willing to try really and get that organization response from it, yeah, more organized response from it, I think. Yeah.
So if you were to wave the magic wand and say that you could do anything, any one thing, you can pick one thing, what would be the one thing? And I know a lot of your experience, of course, is in the school area,
Yeah.
whereas mine's in the business world. So I'm going to ask you about the business world. So I
Okay.
am disadvantaging you a little
Okay.
bit, but if you could pick one thing for the business world, what's the one thing that you would either teach, like them to understand, the point to get across?
I think it's the focus that we've had through this talk really is that it's humanness. Let's just make space for each other. Let's make space enough where we can kind of say, okay, that doesn't resonate with me, but let me listen to somebody else. That real active listening that doesn't always have to impact policy, but gives that person value and space. And I think that's probably the underlying message, with lots of other things I'd like to add, but you tell me one. But that would be my underlying message, that I would definitely love to get people to really understand that there is no harm in making space for the view of somebody or a view that you don't fully understand, really. Yeah.
Perfect. I think you have nailed one of the keys down for sure, is letting the other person say what it is they believe and don't negate it.
Yeah.
Say, okay, I can understand why you believe that way. Would you like to hear how I think about it?
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a completely opposite opinion and have a very, very comfortable, productive conversation.
Most definitely. Most definitely. And I think the stronger an organization becomes is the stronger that those voices become. And the voice doesn't have to have powerful impact, but it may well do if listened to, but it does have to have place and it has to have a space. And I think that's one thing that as humans is our ultimate right, is to voice. I think that's the key thing, that we make space for each other to share respectfully. We'll share.
Wonderful. It's been so great talking to you, Emma. We don't talk with each other enough. We should
Very
we
good.
should do that more.
Very
But it's been great having you here on the podcast, and been enjoying the heck out of talking with you.
lovely.
If people wanted to reach out to you and engage you for some of the different services and consulting and such you do, what would be the best way for somebody to reach you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. My company name is Essential Education Group.com, and so you can find me there as well, or just find me on LinkedIn. You can usually see most of my activity on there.
Perfect. I will put those down in the show notes to make it easy for people, because I'm one of those people that gets to the end of the podcast and then spends like 19 times going forward and backwards to make sure I get the website down right.
Very true.
I will just put those in the notes and make it easy. Well, I so much appreciate you joining us, and I definitely would like to continue the conversation of how do we get the UK to open up to the Autism at Work movement that for 5 years has already been moving ahead in the US and has 50 major Fortune 500 companies behind it.
Definitely. We should definitely have that conversation going forward. And I've loved being on the podcast.
We hope that you've enjoyed another episode of Life in a Neurotypical Universe. Please, if you enjoyed this, share it with your friends. Go take their phone and subscribe them. Hey, it will help us all out. If you want to know more about neurodiversity or have any questions for me, you can reach me at my website, timgoldstein.com, where I'll be more than glad to help you as best I can to navigate through the neurotypical universe.